You know, when someone passes away at the age and well into their 90s, I always say you don't cry, especially if they pass away peacefully. But when someone passes away in their 90s and they had an impact on your life, or you feel familiar with them, whether you knew them personally or you knew their body of work, and they are from the same race as you, and they were born and grew up in a time when racism was totally blatant, and they worked during Jim Crow, and they broke down barriers so that those that came after them would basically have it easier. You stand up and you clap for their homegoing. You always basically remember how they had to endure the pain. Sometimes humiliation that they didn't want to deal with, but they did it because they knew that in the end, the reward would be not just plentiful, but those that were going to come afterward would never, ever, ever have to endure what they did, and that they would be the ones to destroy it for the better. That's the story of Sidney Poitier. Sidney Poitier passed away today at the age of 94. Sidney is iconic, okay? Sidney is one of the last from the golden era of Hollywood. But he was one of the first black men, or if not the first, to cross the color line of Hollywood and be cast in mainstream roles that were a lot of times written for white males. Sidney Poitier was in race films, but the films that he was in regarding race, it was not degrading. There were roles that Sidney would not take. It paid a lot of money. It would pay the bills, but he refused to take it. There was a role that he spoke about on Oprah Winfrey where they wanted him to play a numbers runner. And this is a number runner, you know. For all the people that know about running numbers, didn't want to play it. Because he said that it was a role that was not going to be a credit to his race. Meaning, it was not going to make his people look good. See, with Sidney, he took roles that was image driven, because there were actors in those days, particularly black actors, who were not going to cast themselves in anything degrading, not just to them, but to the entire group. We don't have that now, and that's sad. But back then, we did. And in those days, particularly Black Hollywood. See, Black Hollywood is not a new concept. Black Hollywood goes back, believe it or not, to the 1930s. This is before Sidney arrived. This is when people were close. And a lot of it did have to do with Jim Crow. But a lot of it was that we were naturally close as a people post-slavery. And we knew that if we stuck together and looked out for one another and thought of the group, not just the individual, we will also go further. There will be less chaos, and we will protect one another, particularly when it came to white supremacy. That's not there anymore. Now it's a lot of individuality in Hollywood, especially in Black Hollywood. But none of the actors, I'm talking about the men, if it wasn't for Sidney Poitier, you wouldn't have the actors you have now. You wouldn't have the children that I call his Hollywood children. Denzel, okay? Will Smith, okay? I say Lawrence Fishburne. I would say the late Chadwick Boseman. There are so many others. Jamie Foxx. These are people he paved the way for. And believe it or not, he paved the way for Bill Cosby. And they were actually friends. I became familiar with him and his work when I was 7 years old. Every day I would watch literally a movie called Lillies in the Fields. Lillies of the Fields. And it was about a handyman who was helping a group of German-speaking nuns build a small chapel, like a real small chapel to worship. And the nuns really needed the help. And this man comes, and he's black, and he's helping them. Now, they didn't really want his help at first. And it really was because, skin color. Also, he didn't speak German. And he was a man. And he was a black man. Let's keep it real. But he helped to build that chapel. And I remember they were really happy. And it was a film that talked about race. It didn't really speak about gender, but it talked about race and faith. And he wasn't Catholic in the film. He was probably some kind of Protestant. And he wasn't German. But the nun, who was like, you could say the Mother Superior, at first she wasn't cool on him, but then she became cool on him. And then in the end, they celebrated the building of the chapel. And it was a happy ending, and the film ended. And it pretty much spoke of race in a way where you could sit down, have a discussion with your family and your friends. Those were the type of films in the 60s. And you would basically, learn something, and both parties would leave learning about each other. You would take from one another. That was the whole point of Lillies in the Fields. Hey, I'm the black man. I'm building this church for you because y'all need it. You need my help, and you're gonna humble yourselves, okay? And you're gonna have me build it. I'm a laborer. I know what I'm doing. You probably wanted a white man who spoke German, but he ain't here. And they probably saw that he was a man who, because of what he endured, being black in America, he probably didn't have any faith. But it's like, we're going to show you faith. And we're basically, going to, show you the miracles of Jesus Christ and God. And they would sing these little songs. And it was a cute movie. And I was a little girl, and I actually enjoyed Lillies in the Fields. I would watch it literally every day for like a year and a half. But I didn't understand the importance of the film until I was 9 years old in the 4th grade. And there was a series of books, you might remember it, the Coretta Scott King series. And it had different ones that you could choose from, ranging from politics, performing arts, sports. I'll give you the names. They had Jackie Robinson. They had Martin Luther King. They had Malcolm X, Eddie Murphy. They had Maya Angelou. They even had slave revolters. Nat Turner, Denmark Vesey. And Coretta Scott King would always write an introduction. Well, in this one book, because this was when I noticed it in Black History Month, we had to write about famous Black people. And this was my white teacher. Shout out to Mr. Peter Cohen. He was one of the best teachers I ever had. He was very big on Black history. And we had to choose a book from that series. I chose mine on Lena Horne. I don't believe anyone chose it on Sidney Poitier. But I happened to notice Sidney Poitier on the cover of the book. And on that cover, he was holding what looked like an Academy Award. So at the time, I knew what the Oscars were, but I didn't know why he was holding it. So me being, one of those like children that was inquisitive, I wanted to know. So I happened to basically look at the peek in the book, and I saw he won the Academy Award, but he was the first Black man to win for Best Actor. And he won for the role of Lillies Of The Fields. So I'm like, oh my God, no wonder they played this for a whole year and a half on Showtime, almost every day, because he won the Oscar for it. So it makes perfect sense. And back then, I'm telling my age. This is 1991, okay? At the time, he's like 63, 64 years old. Okay, this is a whole 30 years before his passing. They still playing this movie. He was the first Black man to win the Oscar in a leading role. Literally 24 years after the first person to ever win an Oscar, Hattie McDaniel, who I would say paved the way for him. She broke down that very first barrier in Hollywood, particularly when it comes to being an award-winning actor. But, I'm speaking about, I'll get back to Hattie later on. So I found that out, and it wasn't until a couple of years later until I learned from my mom that he at one time lived in Harlem. Now, this is going to be a long upload, because this is Sidney Poitier. This ain't going to be short. I want everybody to understand and soak this in. Sidney Poitier lived in a place called Dewey Square in Harlem. Back then, a lot of Black actors lived in Harlem. Sidney Poitier used to be on the steps of my mother's building. The building number was 216. And he liked to rest on the stoop, because he liked to sit on steps because he grew up sitting on steps as a kid. So he actually would sit on the steps and he would talk. He wasn't a smoker. He really wasn't a drinker, but he would talk to a lot of the older people, particularly the older women, older men. But my mother would sit on the stoop, and sometimes she would play a hopscotch sometimes, or she would sometimes jump rope. And he would be like, oh, hey, kid. And he really liked children, and he liked to look out for children. He was not a conceited man. He spoke to everyone in that block on 116th Street in Harlem between 7th and 8th. Another thing, too, about Sidney Poitier was that he really was a person that heard a lot of no's, not just from white people, but Black people. There was an actor who was also a drama teacher named Frederick O'Neal. Frederick O'Neal did not like him. He hated him, actually, because he spoke, at the time, he had sort of like, his accent had hints of being Caribbean, because for the first 15 years of his life, he grew up in the Bahamas. He was born in Miami, Florida, unexpectedly. His parents were on a trip. If you want to call him an anchor baby, hey, he was an anchor baby. If you don't, fine, whatever. But he was born here, which automatically made him a U.S. citizen. He returned to Cat Island, Bahamas, and he lived there growing up until he was 15. So he was a citizen who was also Bahamian from both parents. So this drama teacher who worked in Hollywood. And he was one of those actors. He would take a lot of different roles. You can look him up, Frederick O'Neill. He lived a long time. He could not stand him, and he would berate him. He would not only talk about the way he spoke, he would also talk about his skin color. He would call him ugly. He would talk about his hair. And it almost broke Sidney. And one day he was on a stoop, and he was almost about to be in tears because he didn't understand how this man who was black like him would hurt him and would tell him that he wasn't talented, he wasn't anything, and he wasn't going to be anything in Hollywood. And this happened to be around 1946, 47. The war had just ended. Now, I'm what they call I'm one of those children that was born late to my parents because my parents had me in their early 40s. So my mother was about 7 years old. And he's on a stoop and he's talking to a couple of the adults. But my mother is listening to this and my grandmother's hearing this. And my grandmother was upset. My grandmother said, you're going to learn about people here, especially black people. You're going to learn. You're going to learn that a lot of times we can be our own worst enemy. And my mother, being a kid, she was like, it's going to be okay. It's going to be okay. Don't worry. Don't cry. It's going to be all right. One day you're going to make it and you'll probably be a big star in Hollywood. Now, kids say stuff like that because kids are optimistic. And he took it because it was from a kid. And it was like, it piqued his ears. Now, this man lived in Stewie Square on 117th Street between St. Nicholas and 7th. Okay, so all my Harlem heads, y'all know that area. Okay, it's a shame the people that moved, who later on moved in there, but that was a building for black entertainers. I don't know if what my mother said changed his life. I'm not going to go in there and say that, but my grandmother had also would see him time after that. And they would speak and he would tell her, I got this other gig coming up. I got another, I'm casting a play. And then it was, I got casted in a role in a movie. And I might be going out to film it out actually in Hollywood. Because in the 40s, they would actually film in other places. Particularly a lot of race films would be filmed in the South. But he was so excited. Because, this could be the big one. By the end of the 40s, this man was one of the people to watch in Hollywood. The Hollywood trade magazines were calling him the one to watch. I'm crying over this because I really thought that he was going to make it to 100. And he's like the last because of that golden era. Because we don't have any more. And, and this is, I'm going to say what I'm going to say. He starts making it. And by the 50s, really late 20s, early 50s, late 40s, early 50s, he makes a movie called No Way Out. That's basically a black and white film. And it deals with racism and how a black man who's a doctor is basically working in a poor white neighbor area. And even though he's a doctor, they still disrespect him. And one of the people in the film was Richard Whitmark, who was one of the men who basically, if you might know him, watching films with your grandparents, he pushed down the old lady in a wheelchair. That's what he was famous for. That's him. And he was mean to him in that film. But in the end, he needed his help. And they called him to save a life. And in the end, he humbles himself. Because I'm now, if I'm asking, he saved Richard Widmark's leg. And that's what happened. And in the end, he tells him, it's going to be okay. The man was crying because he thought that he was going to die and stuff. He was like, no, you're going to be okay. And he could have been an asshole. He could have been mean to him, but he saved his life because it was a Hippocratic oath. Okay. So that was the role that really made Hollywood take notice. And from there, he was in Cry of a Beloved Country, which was dealing with race relations in South Africa. South Africa. It was also, he was in, now a movie I like. I'm going to tell you the movies I like. He was in Blackboard Jungle. I like that movie. He was in The Defiant Ones. I love The Defiant Ones. My mother loved Porgy and Bess. Raisin the Sun is a film that you watch at school. I've seen Raisin in the Sun. We even had the play. Lillies of the Fields was my favorite of his as a kid. But there's a really good film. Then Heat of the Night. I like To Serve with Love. But there's a really good film. And it's called A Patch of Blue. And that's another film where he was a teacher. And he taught this blonde girl how to actually read and be educated while she was blind. Her parents were what you would call, quote unquote, poor white trash. They were horrible towards her. They didn't care about her well-being, but they hated black people as well. And I believe he was nominated for that as well, for an Oscar, because he had a lot of Oscar nominations. And there was another film I loved by him called Little Nikita, which starred River Phoenix. Now I know, and also Uptown Saturday Night, Let's Do It Again. He teamed up with Bill Cosby, and he was also, if I'm not mistaken, he directed Ghost Dad, and he had a cameo in that. Because I remember I used to love the movie Ghost Dad as a kid. He directed Ghost Dad. As he directed a lot of movies. He was a piece of the action. That was another one. And, I want to say this because I feel as though we will never have the actors that we had in the 50s who are, regardless of color. But these actors that are coming up now, particularly who are black, they don't want to be love interests. They don't want to, have a leading lady side by side them. In Hollywood, all men wanted to have that leading lady. And he had many of them. He had Ruby Dee, Raisin the Sun. He had Diane Carroll in a film. He had the iconic Dorothy Dandridge and Porgy and Bess. He had quite a few. You don't want a leading lady? You don't want to have a leading lady? Where is the sexuality in movies? Even though he really wasn't as sexual in the films. Abby Lincoln, For the Love of Ivy. He wasn't as sexualized in films like he should have been, but he paved the way for Denzel. Denzel is the 80s, 90s, 2000s generation of Sidney Poitier. And Denzel has always acknowledged Sidney paving the way for him. You have these actors in those days, they was proud to be men. Whether they was hunks, whether they was the villain, whether they was the heartthrob, the hero, or even the next door neighbor, even if they were the comedic person, funny man in a movie, they wanted to be men. But especially black men, they loved being the man in the film and the women going after them sexually. They loved it. You don't have that anymore. With the movements that are going around now, it's like if you show off your male prowess, your sexuality as a man, and that you want women, you're vilified. You're labeled a predator. And I hope that one day we go back to those days where romance was the key to everything. You don't have that anymore in films. But another thing that you don't really have, you don't have people that were proud. You don't really see the proudness in films. You don't see that whole thing where I'm proud to be who I am. I don't want to be anything other than myself, but I love my race, and I'm a credit to my race. And that was what Sidney Poitier was. He was that person. If you ever watch interviews that he gave, he would proudly talk about being black. He would also talk about, experiences of like the first formative years where he grew up being Caribbean. He would talk about, growing up on the islands, different things, interacting with people. And there was something that he did speak about when he came and moved up to New York, and how he lived in a room and he had to do all types of menial work. And he talked about how he worked in a mental health facility. And in those days, when you worked in those places, they didn't treat people well. And if you was black, you could forget about it. They more than likely did experiments. These are known facts. But a lot of times, I'll take a job because I need to. And he pretty much was working there while he was in the army. So he served he didn't serve in World War II, but he was in the army. In order to get out of working in the mental facility, he faked having a mental disorder. So he was successfully discharged, even though it was a lie. And he admitted it. But nonetheless, he was discharged. He still worked menial jobs. And then after that, he started getting breaks in acting. But I want to say you'll more than likely never see that era of Black Hollywood, because I really consider that the real Black Hollywood. I think a lot of these people now that I see in Black Hollywood, I just think that they'll just do anything. It's not really money. It's just for attention, trending. The last years of Sidney Poitier's life, they were quiet. And he was married twice. He was married to a black woman named Juanita Hardy. They did live in Harlem. And then they moved to Mount Vernon, where a lot of people were moving to. And they had 4 children. Then he was married to another woman, and she was a white woman from Canada. A lot of black people was upset over that. But in between those marriages, he had an affair. He had a 9-year affair with an actress named Diane Callow. And she always loved him. And in addition to having 6 daughters, because he didn't have any sons, he had 8 grandchildren and 3 great-grandchildren. And it was horrible because he has missing relatives due to Hurricane Dorian that hit the Bahamas over 2 years ago. So hopefully they were able to find them. But he passed away peacefully. And I always had a feeling that he would pass away peacefully. I had a feeling he would live a long time. But I would say he got a lot of awards, like in the Golden Globe category, but he never won an Emmy. He won a Grammy, but he wasn't an EGOT. And I want to say shout out to the Bahamians, because when it comes to the Bahamas, Bahamians have been some of Black Americans' greatest allies when it came to the struggle for fighting for racial equality, economic justice, also Trinidad as well. Jamaica has always been a little bit itchy in a sense, but you do have Jamaicans that have stood to fight against racism as well. I want to say that. And the last thing I want to say is that Sidney Poitier came to this country at a time when, whether you were Black American, Caribbean Black, even Africans, there was time when Africans were here, but the numbers were very, very minuscule. Black people were cohesive. We acknowledged our differences, but we all realized that we were in a lot of ways the same. I know why that tore down. It's a shame that happened. But I want people to remember Sidney Poitier as being an actor who was really good in his craft. He was a person that worked hard, and he tore down barriers. And please do not bring diaspora wars to this. Please don't. Please don't. I'm going to do a live. I was going to do a live about another topic. I will not say. I think y'all all know what it is. I'm not going to do that one today. I'm going to postpone that one for tomorrow. Sunday. I'm going to postpone that for Sunday because there's another live upcoming. But I want to... Now, I might do that one this evening. That one. But I want us to honor this man. He lives a clean life. He lived a scandalous-free life, minus the affair with Diane Carroll. But hopefully, I don't want to say hopefully, but whoever will be the successor of Denzel paved the way, and Denzel is scandalous-free also. White women love him. Oh my God, Denzel, I love you so much. I want to hug you. Can I hug you? And then his wife is looking at them like, no. Everyone loves him except for Katie Couric, and we as Black women, we shut that down. But I just want us to all remember, the iconic Sidney Poitier, because he is iconic. I don't believe in saying was, I believe in saying is. And to all of those who want to be actors, who wants to be, in the theater, and you're Black, you don't have to coon. You don't have to, take roles that are demeaning. You may not make a lot of money. You have actors who have like over 300 roles. Sidney may have reached maybe 100. It's okay. His counterpart, Lincoln Perry, that's Step and Fetch It, was a multi-millionaire. Made a lot of money, but he doesn't have respect. Nobody remembers him. Matter of fact, every role that he was in a movie is cut out because that's how degrading it was. So just think of that. And with that being said, Sidney Poitier, thank you for what you gave to Hollywood, what you gave to the world, what you gave to Black culture. And this is how I will sign off. In memory of Sidney Poitier.